Alright, so now, boom, here it is, lesson 2. Tenths and hundreds. We're still talking about decimal fractions. So let's go through and let's do a quick review before we jump into the meat of the lesson. Oops, too many pages. Let me scroll down, scroll back up here. Well, a quick review of what we've talked about so far. Well, a decimal is a part of a whole. A fraction with a denominator in base 10. And remember what we said about that if we're looking at those type of fractions, the denominator is going to be 10, 100, 1000. Ooh, that's a small zero. And you remember that also that the point or the period is used to separate whole numbers and decimals, and it also means and, like you say, 4 and 4 tenths. And remember the one key thing about this, because we are going to be doing this and trying to represent this mathematically and also pictorially, is as digit travel from left to right, the value is reduced by 1/10. And our last keynote is that behind every whole number is a decimal point. So let's look at this one thing. If I take this one little picture and I shade this whole thing in, I can say that this is one whole. But remember that behind every whole number is a decimal point. So I can say that this is one whole and 0 tenths. So remember, behind every whole number is a decimal point and a trailing 0. Which means that we just have a whole, but we have no other parts to go along with that. So let's look at tenths. Well, tenths, let me switch that. As a fraction and a decimal, the definition is the same. 10 parts in a whole. And what that means, because we just got through talking about fraction, is that this can be written as 1/10. And you remember, if we want to try to represent that as a decimal, we make our place value chart. Ones, decimal point to represent, to separate the wholes and the parts, and also to say and then tenths. And you remember the strategy that we looked at briefly in the other video is that we have no wholes, no ones, and we have, circle that, 1/10. Remember, that's what we have to do each time. Well, how to represent fractions and decimals, and we're going to be just talking about tenths this time. And we're going to later on smash both of those together in some of our next lessons. So this time, if I go through and I just shade up here, well, our fraction is going to be 3 tenths. Well, what about our decimal then? Well, make our place value chart. Ones, I'm just going to put an O for ones. Decimal. For tenths, I'm going to put THS for tenths. I say, well, I have no ones or no wholes, and I have 1, 2, 3 tenths. Same way, the only thing we're looking at is just the numerator. And we're going to have another lesson to where I show y'all a little trick or a little strategy that you can use to quickly transfer back from a decimal back to a fraction. Now, let's look at our next part, hundreds. The same with tenths. As a fraction and a decimal, the definition is the same. 100 parts in a whole. And so when we look at that, and if I just want to just shade in that little nugget right there, well, I'm talking about 100 of a whole is shaded, and that'll be my fraction. Well, as a decimal, how am I going to write 100th? Well, I make my place value chart. Ones, decimal point, tenths, hundredths is going to be HDTHS. And well, I have, again, no ones, 0. I have no tenths. And I have 1/100th shading in. And so if I was going to write this as a decimal, this is what my decimal would look like. And now let's go through and let's look again at just one more example. Again, let me change my color. And here, my fraction is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. My fraction is going to be 6/100ths. And then, well, what about my decimal? How am I going to write my decimal? Again, make my place value chart. Ones, my decimal point, tenths, hundredths. And well, how do I write that? Well, 0 ones, decimal, 0 tenths, and I have 6/100ths shaded in. And so every time we see one of these pictures, we always label both. And, well, coming up in lesson 3, we're going to cover word form and standard form, and then continue on from there. Well, but that is the end of this lesson. I know, again, another long one, but hang in there.